The easiest way to capture attention is to play the victim. When Chris Rock delivered his savage takedown of Meghan Markle, it wasn't just another celebrity roast, it was a declaration of war that ignited an unprecedented global comedy assault. Within months, comedians from London's West End to Los Angeles comedy clubs began targeting Meghan Markle with surgical precision, transforming from scattered jokes into a coordinated comedic phenomenon that spread across continents. This wasn't mere mockery but a systematic dismantling of every narrative she'd carefully constructed. From her claims of royal protocol ignorance to her victimhood stories, comedians turned her own words into weapons, with audiences devouring the material with thunderous applause night after night. To understand how comedy became Meghan's worst nightmare, we need to examine three devastating waves of attack: the precision strikes from A-list comedians exposing her most famous claims' absurdity, the global comedy tour circuit that made her a worldwide punchline, and the brutal verdict from one legendary comedian whose psychological analysis became the defining takedown of her entire public persona. The comedy phenomenon began innocently during regular sets but quickly evolved when audiences started demanding more Meghan material. Comedy clubs noticed that any mention of her name triggered massive reactions, soon dedicating entire segments of major global tours to dissecting her every move, interview, and contradiction. The transformation was swift and merciless. What had been occasional celebrity roasting became a full-blown international phenomenon. Venues reported some of their loudest audience reactions ever, while social media exploded with clips of comedians destroying Meghan's credibility, each video racking up millions of views and shares. The brutal reality was that the more she tried to control her narrative through carefully crafted interviews and Netflix specials, the more material she gave comedians to work with. Every damage control attempt became fresh ammunition for the next tour stop, like watching someone dig their own grave while an entire industry of professional joke writers stood by taking notes. The comedy world had found its perfect target and wasn't about to let go. Chris Rock's approach proved particularly devastating because of its surgical precision. He didn't attack them personally but targeted their story, which was so full of holes that comedy practically wrote itself. Rock exposed the absurdity of claiming ignorance about one of the world's most famous families, then completely neutralized their biggest weapon, the explosive racism accusations, with simple observations that voiced what millions were thinking but were too afraid to say. Other comedians watched and took notes, realizing the Sussex narrative wasn't just fair game but comedy gold waiting to be mined. British comedy struck back with vengeance, with puppet shows, satire programs, and stand-up circuits mobilizing like an army responding to an invasion. Their intimate knowledge of royal family dynamics gave them home field advantage, allowing them to mock Harry's obsession with his line of succession with recognition that made audiences wince rather than just laugh. They went for the throat, portraying the couple as money-grabbing hypocrites who wanted privacy while living next to Oprah, a narrative audiences clearly agreed with. The British response carried particular cruelty because these comedians had watched Harry grow up, seen him as the cheeky younger prince, the war hero, the people's favorite. His transformation into what they saw as a Hollywood puppet wasn't just comedy material but genuine cultural mourning disguised as humor. The Edinburgh Festival became ground zero for royal roasting, with comics from across the UK descending with material specifically crafted to destroy the Sussex brand. Reviews described audiences as bloodthirsty and merciless in their appetite for more devastating punchlines. What the British comedy world understood that others didn't was the sheer audacity of the couple's complaints, people living in a Montecito mansion complaining about hardship to a nation dealing with a cost of living crisis. The comedy wrote itself, but the delivery was surgical, evolving beyond mockery into cultural excommunication. These comedians weren't just making jokes but formally ejecting the couple from British cultural relevance. American late-night television brought industrial-level production values to the destruction, with Saturday Night Live, The Tonight Show, and Late Night all lining up to take their shots. Unlike British comedians focusing on cultural betrayal, American comedy zeroed in on pure entertainment value, making Harry and Meghan into recurring characters in their comedy universe. SNL's portrayal of Harry as the dim-witted younger brother became so iconic that audiences would cheer just hearing his voice, character assassination disguised as sketch comedy. The American assault proved particularly cruel because these comedians weren't just making jokes but reflecting genuine public opinion. The laughter wasn't forced or artificial, audiences were genuinely entertained by the couple's missteps, and late-night TV was simply giving them what they wanted. The transformation was complete. Harry and Meghan had gone from respected public figures to late-night comedy fixtures, with every public appearance becoming potential material for the next show, every interview dissected for contradictions, every lifestyle choice becoming punchlines. The comedy industry discovered that Meghan and Harry material was pure ratings gold, with clips featuring them consistently outperforming other celebrity content and social media engagement skyrocketing whenever they were mentioned. When the mockery moved from professional stages to bedroom studios, something explosive happened as millions of content creators discovered that Meghan Markle material was pure viral gold. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, every platform became a battlefield where influencers competed to deliver the most savage takedowns. This online creator assault differed from anything before: raw, unfiltered ridicule from ordinary people who felt personally betrayed by the couple's contradictions, with audience response reaching volcanic levels. The creator revolution's devastation came from its authenticity, when a TikToker with millions of followers recreated Meghan's pretzel rebagging scene with perfect comedic timing. It felt more real than any late-night sketch. These creators weren't reading scripts but expressing genuine bewilderment at her behavior. The viral nature meant every misstep was instantly memified, with Meghan's name correction becoming a soundbite used in thousands of videos, her celebrity name dropping turned into running gags, and her lifestyle show moments recreated with increasingly absurd parodies. The podcast world joined with long-form analytical takedowns that dissected every interview, documentary moment, and public appearance, hour-long investigations into the couple's contradictions complete with receipts and evidence. What the creator economy understood that traditional media didn't was the power of relatability. When a mom blogger with 3 kids explained why Meghan's complaints about royal life rang hollow, it carried more weight than any professional critic. The algorithms loved it, with videos criticizing the couple consistently outperforming positive content and engagement reaching through the roof. Comments, shares, saves everything. Social media platforms began actively promoting royal criticism because audiences couldn't get enough. The brutal reality for Harry and Meghan was that the creator assault wasn't organized or coordinated but organic, millions of people independently deciding their story didn't add up and using their platforms to say so. This wasn't a media conspiracy but genuine public opinion expressing itself through demographics traditional comedy never could reach: teenagers on TikTok, millennial podcasters, Gen X Facebook users, all united in their bewilderment at the couple's behavior. Every time they tried to respond or clarify, they just created more content for creators to dissect, turning damage control into damage amplification. When professional stand-up comedians took the gloves off completely, they brought weapons that TV hosts could never use: no network censors, no corporate sponsors, just raw, unfiltered truth delivered to audiences hungry for someone to finally say what they were all thinking. They absolutely demolished the couple's credibility, with Simon Brodkin's takedown becoming legendary not for individual jokes but for systematic destruction of their entire worldview. His analysis of their corporate-sounding nicknames struck a nerve by exposing how calculated and inauthentic their whole presentation had become. The stand-up world understood something other comedy forms missed: this wasn't just about making fun of celebrities but calling out a fundamental disconnect between claimed victimhood and obvious privilege. Audiences responded to the honesty, not just the humor, with comedy venues reporting unprecedented reactions during royal material. People weren't just laughing but applauding, cheering, and demanding more. Clubs started advertising royal roasting nights because demand was so intense. The security complaint became a particular target because it crystallized everything wrong with their victim narrative: people living in unimaginable luxury asking for sympathy because they had to pay for their own protection like every other wealthy person. Podcast appearances by these comedians amplified their material further, with long-form conversations allowing deeper analysis of the couple's contradictions reaching millions of listeners who shared the comedians' bewilderment. What emerged from the stand-up world was a consensus transcending political lines: liberal and conservative comedians united in assessing that something was fundamentally wrong with the Sussex narrative. This built toward one ultimate moment when South Park dedicated an entire episode to Harry and Meghan, creating not just satire but cultural assassination. Their worldwide privacy tour became the definitive visual representation of everything wrong with the Sussex brand, making the couple's contradictions impossible to ignore. Flying around the world on private jets while screaming about wanting privacy through megaphones wasn't just funny but devastating psychological warfare disguised as cartoon comedy. The most brutal moment came when the couple finally found their quiet place and seemed confused by the actual privacy they claimed to want, exposing the fundamental lie at their narrative's heart: they never wanted privacy, only control. Family Guy took a different approach, turning the couple into shorthand for getting paid millions for doing nothing, with their Del Tucco sponsorship joke capturing how far they'd fallen from royal dignity to desperate influencer territory. The animated assault proved particularly cruel because cartoons crystallize public perception into simple, unforgettable images. Once South Park showed them as hypocritical attention seekers, that became their permanent cartoon identity. The animation studios discovered what everyone else knew: royal family dysfunction was comedy gold that practically wrote itself, with every new interview or public appearance providing more material. The cartoon world wasn't just reflecting public opinion but shaping it, with millions of viewers absorbing these brutal takedowns through animated entertainment. References to South Park's privacy tour became internet shorthand for celebrity hypocrisy, with images so powerful they transcended original comedy into genuine cultural commentary. The truly devastating reality for Harry and Meghan was that you can't argue with a cartoon. You can dispute interviews, challenge articles, or respond to criticism, but animated parody exists in its own universe where your contradictions are preserved forever in colorful, memorable form. While cartoons delivered the visual coup de grace, the intellectual knockout punch came from Bill Mayer's philosophical dismantling that exposed the fundamental flaw in their entire strategy. When Mayer stepped up to deliver his verdict, something shifted. This wasn't another comedian taking shots for laughs but a cultural philosopher diagnosing exactly why every other comedian's jokes had landed so perfectly. His analysis proved more devastating than any punchline, cutting straight to the core issue: the fundamental hypocrisy of wanting sympathy while demanding attention, claiming victimhood while living in luxury, preaching privacy while courting publicity. Mayer's most surgical strike contrasted their constant complaining with Queen Elizabeth's stoic dignity, highlighting everything they could have been versus what they chose to become. The late Queen's never complain, never explain philosophy suddenly looked like wisdom compared to their endless grievance tour. Mayer's power came from articulating what millions felt but couldn't express: the disconnect between claimed hardship and obvious privilege that had bothered audiences for years. His final statement about refusing to bend the knee to their narrative became the rallying cry for everyone feeling manipulated by their victimhood claims, identifying the most annoying aspect of their project: the arrogant demand that everyone validate their version of reality. The audience reaction showed this wasn't just laughter but recognition. Mayer had diagnosed a cultural phenomenon beyond one celebrity couple, identifying a broader pattern of privileged victimhood that audiences were rejecting across the board. What elevated Mayer's takedown beyond comedy was its intellectual framework. He wasn't just pointing out contradictions but explaining why they mattered in a broader cultural context, creating sociology disguised as stand-up. The ripple effects were immediate, with other commentators using his framework to discuss not just Harry and Meghan but celebrity culture generally. He'd provided the intellectual architecture for understanding why the comedy assault had been so effective. Mayer's verdict proved particularly devastating because it wasn't partisan. Liberal and conservative audiences alike recognized the truth in his analysis, identifying something that transcended political lines and spoke to basic human psychology. The philosophical framework was complete. Mayer hadn't just delivered jokes but a diagnosis that explained why every comedian from Chris Rock to South Park had found such fertile ground in the Sussex story. Understanding why the comedy worked reveals a disturbing pattern. This wasn't just entertainment but real-time cultural rejection happening before our eyes. Every laugh, applause, and viral clip evidenced the massive disconnect between the Sussex narrative and public reality. The comedy world had accidentally become the voice of authentic public opinion, free to say what audiences actually thought while mainstream media wrestled with political correctness and royal protocol. The brutal revelation from Mayer's analysis was that this wasn't really about Harry and Meghan at all. They had become symbols of a much larger cultural phenomenon: privileged victimhood in the social media age. The comedy proved so effective because audiences recognized a pattern they'd seen everywhere in trending topics about elite complaining. The digital age had created a new celebrity crisis where public figures could no longer control their narrative through carefully managed media appearances. Social media democratized criticism, and comedy became the weapon of choice for calling out authenticity failures. The Sussex situation uniquely crystallized every contradiction of modern celebrity culture, demanding privacy while courting publicity, claiming victimhood from positions of privilege, expecting sympathy while living in luxury. The global nature of the comedy assault proved this wasn't just a cultural or political divide. Comedians from different countries, backgrounds, and political perspectives all arrived at the same conclusion independently: the story simply didn't add up. Cultural experts analyzing why the comedy had been so effective found clear consensus. Audiences were rejecting not just Harry and Meghan but an entire approach to public discourse that prioritized victimhood over accountability. Historians of comedy noticed how this compared to other celebrity takedowns. Unlike typical roasts that fade from memory, the Sussex comedy had staying power because it tapped into fundamental questions about authenticity and privilege. Psychologists studying the phenomenon identified something crucial: the laughter wasn't cruel but cathartic, with audiences feeling relief at finally having permission to question a narrative that had never quite made sense to them. After witnessing this unprecedented comedic destruction, the question remains whether Harry and Meghan can ever recover from becoming the world's favorite punchline. The evidence suggests something far more devastating than simple reputation damage. They've become permanently embedded in comedy culture as symbols of everything wrong with modern celebrity victimhood. The brutal reality is that comedy crystallizes public perception in ways almost impossible to reverse. Once you become the punchline, every future appearance reminds people why they were laughing initially. The Sussex story has given comedians enough material to last for decades. This story represents something bigger than one couple's fall from grace. The comedy assault on Harry and Meghan marks a cultural turning point where audiences reject performative victimhood from positions of privilege. The laughter isn't just entertainment but rebellion against being manipulated by carefully crafted narratives. The comedy world accidentally discovered the most effective weapon against narrative manipulation: simply pointing out contradictions and letting audiences draw their own conclusions without think pieces or political analysis, just brutal honesty disguised as entertainment. For Harry and Meghan, the path forward looks increasingly impossible. Every interview creates new material for comedians, every public appearance reminds audiences of the contradictions, every rebranding attempt reinforces why they became punchlines initially. The verdict from the court of public opinion delivered through comedy appears final. They wanted to control their narrative, but comedy democratized the response. They demanded sympathy, but audiences chose laughter instead. What we've witnessed isn't just two celebrities fall but a masterclass in how authenticity works in the digital age. The comedy proved so effective because it expressed what millions felt but couldn't articulate, and once that feeling finds its voice through humor, there's no putting it back in the bottle. The laughter has spoken, and its message is clear. In a world where everyone has a platform and comedy is the ultimate truth teller, authenticity isn't just preferred but required.